Snow came softly, a dusting that laced the crenellations and the black pine boughs with white, that stuck in the fur about Ghost's ruff until the dire wolf looked carved from moonlight. In the yard, steel rang and steamed breath curled, and Jon worked until his arms trembled. He drove the wooden blade into Robb's guard and took the counterblow without thinking, the rhythm between them worn smooth by years. Theon Greyjoy leaned against a post, wearing a grin he must have been born with, and called instructions that were more mockery than help. Bran watched from a barrel with eyes bright as river ice. Arya had slipped down from the gallery to perch closer still, her elbows on her knees, her whole small body leaning into every feint. "Again," Ser Rodrik said. His whiskers rhymed with snow. Jon lunged and recovered, lungs burning, the world narrowed to balance and weight, the shuffle of boots and the crack of wood. When the horns sounded from the gatehouse, long, welcoming calls that rolled through stone and pine, everything paused. The bells took it up. Even the ravens seemed to listen. "The king," Robb breathed, and his grin was a boy's. Theon shoved off the post and swept a dramatic bow to no one. The yard spilled its contents toward the walls and towers like grain poured from a scoop. Jon straightened, set the practiced sword back on the rack, and raked his sleeve across his face. Snow stung his cheeks. The cold helped him hold his expression still. He wanted to see them arrive, wanted it like hunger, banners and gilded harness. A man who had once swung a warhammer so hard it shattered steel and kingship with it, but he did not follow the others to the gatehouse. Catelyn Stark had asked him not to show himself when the queen came. Asked, not ordered, with that composed courtesy that made the words into a closed door. Ned had not argued. Jon had nodded and kept his face smooth. He had practice at that. Ghost brushed his fingers with a cold nose and then moved as Jon moved, a pale shadow at his knee, silent as winter. He climbed the old parapet on the east wall, where the stone bore the grooves of 1,000 years and the wind carried the smell of smoke and horse and distant pine. From there, he could watch the road undulate in from the south through black-green trees. He saw them come like a river of color. The crowned stag on black, the lion on crimson, the white cloak flashing in front like a fallen star on a man's shoulders. A rolling forest of spears and lances, the clatter of mail and the pounding of hooves, the breath of hundreds of animals smoking in the frost. And at the center, a huge man on a huge horse, the white of his breath clouding before him. A beard gone to iron and silver, eyes like chips of pale blue under a heavy brow. Robert Baratheon filled the saddle the way a storm fills a sky. He laughed and threw back his head. You could not hear it from the wall, but you could see how everything bent toward him. The jesting, the smiles, the wary looks tucked under lowered lashes. Cersei Lannister rode to his side, a figure of polished gold and perfect balance. Her hair was a bright coin under the gray day, her back straight, the corners of her mouth faintly, permanently amused. Joffrey was a slender splendor of cloth of gold, the boy holding himself so carefully tall it had to ache. Myrcella shivered under a fur cloak that made her look like a small cat, and Tommen's cheeks were pink with cold and fear and excitement, real and unguarded as any child's. And there were others, the Kingsguard gleaming like milk and ice, Jaime Lannister's easy seat and sleepy smile. Sandor Clegane like a slab of stone went walking. The Grand Maester hunched as if the world were a collar too tight around his neck. Littlefinger looked like a man who'd just heard a joke he couldn't quite share. Renly Baratheon had a beauty that almost forgave his velvet. Varys's eyes were kind and unreadable. Ser Barristan Selmy's face seemed carved from a firmer virtue than most men had any business possessing. Tyrion Lannister rode a shaggy mountain pony that had opinions about every step. His cloak was fine and warm, and he didn't seem to care that his hood fell back and snow made silver sparks in his pale hair. He scanned the walls with quick intelligence, eyes lingering on everything that wasn't meant to be noticed. Jon watched it all and told himself he was used to the feeling of being a shadow behind a door. He was not a boy, he was a bastard, he had ghost. The wind made his eyes water and he let it. The gates yawned wide. The procession came through in clatter and steam, and the sound filled Winterfell all the way down to the crypts where the old kings slept. Catelyn stood with Sansa and Arya at her sides, hair like a river caught in ice, every line of her controlled. Robb stood next to Ned at the front, tall when measured by boys and not yet by men. Ned's hair was touched by frost, and his face did not change when Robert dismounted and took him in crushing arms. The king went to the crypts almost at once. Jon knew because Arya told him later, breathless, smuggling buttered bread she'd stolen from a platter. She ate sitting cross-legged on a bench in the deep gallery above the hall, hands greasy and happy, hair escaping every attempt at order. "He wanted to see her," Arya said, and her voice softened like it always did when she meant Aunt Lyanna and not some story skeleton. "He and father went down alone. It was quiet enough you could hear the snow." Sansa says the queen kept smiling, but her mouth looked very tired. Jon ran a hand down Ghost's back. Beneath the fur, the direwolf was spring steel and coiled silence. He thought of the crypts, the smell of cold stone and old dust, the way the carved faces watched you. He tried not to think of Lyanna's statue and the flowers Ned left there sometimes, as if the dead could be warmed by color. That night, the hall burned with candles and laughter and meat. Music strung itself around beams and banners. Jon watched from the gallery with the men who served and the minor knights and the cupbearers who didn't wish to be noticed. He liked it there. Nothing was expected of him beyond quiet. He liked to see how everything came together. The knife flash of the queen's glance feeling for weakness, the way Renly could make a table lean toward him by telling a story that had nothing to do with the story he was telling, the way Robert lifted his cup and the whole room tilted with him. Ned sat at the king's right hand and said little. When he smiled, it was at a word from Robb or Arya, or when Sansa's hands trembled but her chin found its place. Catelyn's patience was a jewel that did not catch the light. Tyrion Lannister wandered up to lean against a pillar near where Jon stood. He had a goblet and a face that took the measure of every pair of shoes that crossed the floor. He noticed Ghost the way some men notice a blade. That one, he said aside, would make a court fall quiet from mere politeness. Jon glanced down at Ghost. The direwolf's eyes were red in this light, deeper than garnets. "He prefers the quiet. An enviable preference," Tyrion sipped. "And you? Do you prefer rooms arranged to forget you or rooms that will not allow it?" "I found there's no middle." He smiled without bitterness. "Forgive me. I have a taste for asking questions that earn me trouble." Jon said, "I'm good at going where I'm told." "Are you?" Tyrion studied him, eyes quick and bright. "I find most of us are good at pretending that's what we're doing." He lifted his cup as if to salute Ghost. "And every so often the pretending becomes true. Dangerous habit." Jon wondered if the dwarf meant kindness or a warning. He did not know which he wanted more. On the third day, the letter arrived from the Eyrie, a tight little bird folded into itself. Catelyn came to Ned with it in the solar while the snow hissed outside, and their voices grew hushed. Jon did not try to listen. He knew the taste of closed doors. Still, he saw the look that passed between them later at supper, the look of two people who have decided something that will change the shape of a year. "Your Uncle Benjen rides at first light," Robb told him in the yard that night, wrestling Ghost's attention with a sausage. "He goes back to the wall. He asked for you." Jon swallowed and could have flown. The Night's Watch had been the shape of his future for as long as he could remember the ache of being set aside. A place without wives and lands and names, but with its own honor. A place where the walls were honest and the enemies were not masks. His heart hammered too fast to fit his chest. "You'll come back," Arya said, fierce like a small storm. "You'll come back wearing black and a smile just to frighten Sansa." "I'll come back to tell you stories," Jon told her, and she nodded as if that were a solemn oath. Sansa said little, eyes too bright. Cat watched from the steps, and her gaze skated over Jon as if contact might burn. A last supper, a last morning. The road north turned to iron under winter's foot. Benjen rode like a man whose blood had learned the beat of cold. Tyrion Lannister asked to join them as far as the wall, because he'd never seen it and because he did things other men did not for the bold taste of doing them. The Hound laughed at him and Tyrion laughed back. Jon rode with Ghost padding beside his stirrup, and each mile that fell behind him made the air cleaner. The world sharpened. Pines, the salt of the sea carried far inland on a particular wind. A hawk's cry whittled down into the sky. Tyrion talked and was good company. He did not pity and he did not flatter, and he had the vicious generosity of a man who will say a truth you are trying to hide from yourself and then pour you wine afterward. They camped and rose and went on, and the land rose under them to the long white spine that lay across the end of the world. The wall staggered the breath. It ate the horizon and bent the sky with its cold. Up close, the ice had colors in it. Old blue, trapped light, a depth that made you feel you were staring down into something that had no bottom. Jon stood under it and felt small and seen, as if the world itself had eyes. The men of the watch received them with dry humor and bowls of stew. The Lord Commander's laugh was gravel in a well. Maester Aemon's hands were birds in winter. "You have a look in your eye," the old man said to Jon one night in the rookery, gently touching the air near Jon's cheek, as if he'd confused him with someone he'd held once. "A door half open. Be certain of what you let in, child." "I mean to be," Jon said. Ghost lay by the brazier, and the brazier's feeble heat made no difference to the dire wolf at all. He trained and learned and bled a little. He helped boys who had never held a sword except by its wrong end. He watched a deserter whipped and thought of the man Ned had beheaded that first morning of snow, and understood something about the shape of justice that did not comfort him. At night, sometimes, he dreamed of a forest full of blue fire and the sound of something unmaking. Sometimes he dreamed of a statue with flowers at its feet and a woman's voice that had never spoken to him. The birds found him in the yard 4 weeks after he had first come under the wall's long shadow. They came with the urgency of storm birds, and the raven that came to the Lord Commander with the royal seal would not be pried off anything with a stick. The Lord Commander read the letter twice, his good eye going harder, and then he called for Jon as if the name had been hidden within the parchment itself. The words were simple and absolute. "Come at once to King's Landing. You will not take vows. By order of the king." Jon stared at the seal as if the red wax should explain itself. He went to the rookery and found Maester Aemon holding the letter as if it were an egg that might hatch a serpent or a dove. "I thought I knew what I wanted," Jon said helplessly. Outside the window, a hill of ice burned blue in the thin sun. "Wanting is a compass," Aemon murmured, "not a chain. The trick is remembering that compasses need stars to mean anything." He blinked those clouded eyes in Jon's direction, as if he could see him by memory. "The king can be a star, child, or a storm. You will have to decide which his letter is." Benjen clapped Jon's shoulder hard enough to make him feel the place all day. "You haven't sworn," Benjen said, practical and not unkind. "That's a gate still open. Men come here to close gates they can't manage otherwise. I know how that sounds. I mean it kindly." He ran his gloved hand over Ghost's head. Ghost accepted it as he did most things, with stillness. "Go see what he wants. You can come north again if you choose it. Vows are for men who know what they're turning their backs on." Jon packed the few things he had made his own and left a part of himself coiled on a bed in a cold cell like a winter snake waiting to wake. Tyrion decided he had seen enough ice to last a lifetime and came south again with him. The road felt different in reverse. Heavier, as if words were stones in the saddlebags. Ghost hunted things Jon did not see and came back with blood on his muzzle and eyes like embers under their ash. King's Landing rose out of the brown-green like something that had grown too fast for its own shape, all thrust and clutter, red stone and reek and rattle. The Red Keep was a paw on a hill. The smell of the sea was old wine that had turned to vinegar and salt kept too long in a damp cupboard. Jon wanted sky and could not find enough of it. Ghost moved like frost through the press of people, causing gaps without effort. Ned Stark met Jon in a private room warded with guards and silences. He looked older than he had under the white sky of home, and there was a tightness in him that did not sit right with the man Jon knew. When he took Jon's shoulders in his hands, the sensation was of grip and relief both. "I didn't know if you'd left your vows by now," Ned said. "I should have written sooner. I didn't trust the birds." His mouth tightened. I trust few things here. Why am I here? Jon asked. It came out more plainly than he intended, and something like approval flickered over Ned's face. The king has questions about his children, Ned said quietly. He has proof he does not like the taste of. He has enemies who smile. He has a habit of forgetting which parts of the world are harder than he is. Ned's hand tightened. He saw you in Winterfell. He asked then what will become of you. I think he meant to ask something more. I hadn't answers prepared for that. Jon had thought himself braced for anything. He had not thought himself braced for this. He sent for me because... Ned's mouth became a line. Because I told him I would not lie about what I have found. He thinks putting a certain boy where certain people can see him might force the world into a shape it refuses to keep otherwise. He remembers Lyanna every time he can find an excuse to do it. Jon's heart struck the inside of his ribs. He knows. He knows only what he chooses to know. Ned's eyes were winter black, and what I have told him, we will speak more of some things when the city no longer listens at every crack. The audience was held in the throne room, with its echoing vault and that ugly, glittering chair that made a threat of sitting. Robert lounged in a way that said he would have been more at ease on a barrel or a battlefield. He scanned Jon from boots to brow and then grunted as if he recognized the shape of a stubborn thing. You have your father's long winters in your eyes, he said. Jon bowed. He tried not to feel the throne like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Cersei stood at the king's left hand, a statue of scorn and polish, every lash placed just so. Joffrey stood too, his face a coin cast more for glare than for use. He looked at Ghost the way a boy looks at a thing he would like to break in front of people. Jaime's mouth quirked. Barristan Selmy's weight shifted barely, as a man adjusts the memory of a wound before the weather turns. This is the boy, Robert said, and no one would have mistaken it for a question. The one with sense enough to stand where he can see and keep his mouth shut unless he can improve the quality of the air. His laugh boomed. I want sense around me. Cersei's smile did not move. How sound, to import it from the snows. Robert ignored her. He waved a hand at Varys, Littlefinger, and Renly as if shooing birds. We'll have the quiet for this, he said, and the room thinned as lords and ladies found reasons to be elsewhere. It did not thin nearly enough. Nothing in King's Landing ever did. But the circle around the steps grew clearer. Ned, Barristan, Pycelle stooped like a hook, Jaime lingering like a lazy cat, Renly lingering like an eager one, Varys with his hands folded as if in prayer, Littlefinger's eyes bright with the best seat in a stage play he hadn't written. Cersei like a blade that hadn't yet been drawn. Robert rose. The years lay over him the way mail does, a thing you forget the weight of until you try running. His voice filled the broken swords like a wind. This city likes games, he said. I do not. We'll be plain. The Lady Catelyn's letter from the Eyrie says we have snakes in the bed. My hand tells me he's found a cause to believe it. When I ask to see the proof, I am shown a line of names and the black hair of my bastards. My bastards. All marks a man leaves when he has more fire than patience. He grinned like a man who hated himself a little for the grin. They are mine. My supposed golden sons are not. A king is a thing that needs to be true even when he is too tired for it. My children. He thumped his own chest as if testing the ribs. Are not my children. I will not have the Lannisters put a puppet with my name in a boy's mouth on my throne. Cersei's breath left her in the smallest visible shiver. Joffrey's skin took on a strained gleam, like wax held too near a candle. Robert gestured, abrupt as a hammer. Ned Stark's boy is a bastard. He was raised in a good house and taught a better sense of the world than I want to admit I ever had. He is not mine, and that is the point. The realm needs an heir I can swear to with my eyes open. He came down from the dais one step, and Jon felt the room tilt. Ned, Robert said roughly, the realm owes you debts it doesn't know the numbers of. I cannot command your son to be a thing, but I can make it easier for the realm to breathe. He faced Jon, and the hall was suddenly so quiet Jon could hear the sea at a distance somewhere, and the whisper of Ghost's breath like paper shredded by a careful hand. "Jon Snow," the king said, "I name you Prince of Dragonstone and my chosen successor until the realm decides in council to say otherwise. You will stand where every man can see you and know the shape of the future does not wear a lion's smile. Step forward." Ned stood as if every bone had to remember its duty separately. Jon could not move. Then he did, and the steps up to the dais felt as if something in the room grew longer between each stride. Ghost paced him. Barristan's head tilted. Jaime's eyes were amused in a way that said he had found something worth watching at last. Cersei spoke. The warmth had gone from her voice like heat from a hearth left to die. "This is lawlessness in dressing," she said. "You cannot leap your brothers to place another's bastard at your back and call it prudence." "The law is a river," Renly said lightly, almost gently. "It knows how to move around stones." "The law is a wall," Stannis would have said if he had been there. But of course he was not. Stannis had written a letter and retired to Dragonstone with enough salt in his mouth to sting any man's eyes. He was not a man who made a habit of watching the play of a thing he already despised. Jon had never met him. He felt the absence like a draft. Robert held out a circlet. A thin, smooth gold that had the look of a thing that had been buried and found again. "This belonged to a prince who broke a promise and died for it," he said. And there was something like respect in his voice and something like hunger and something like grief. An ugly mixture made honest by the size of it. "You will not be that prince. Kneel." Jon went down on one knee. Ghost lay, red-eyed, on the steps beside him, a white flame banked. He felt the weight of the circlet on his hair and the sting of the cold metal. It was not heavy. It was heavier than a wall. He did not look at Cersei. He looked at Ned. Ned's face was stone with light behind it. When Jon rose, the room exhaled. Some men looked thoughtful and calculated quickly. Some looked relieved with a relief that made their spines softer. Some looked at Cersei and then at the floor. Jaime smiled and clapped softly, as if he had just seen a bird pulled from a hat. Joffrey stood with his hands too tight at his sides. Later, the words ran everywhere like water under doorways. Some called it a clever break against a too-slick wheel. Some called it treason in silk. Some said the king had no children, that the lion had stolen a throne-sized brood from him. Some spat the word bastard as if the syllables would stain their teeth. Some said younger brothers sharpened knives in candlelight. Stannis's letters arrived on the same tide as those words. The law, the law, the law, written stern and neat and merciless. Renly smiled more and said less. That night Ned brought Jon to a balcony over the sea, where the wind came clean enough to cut away what the day had left. The city lay in a sprawl of old fires and new schemes. "I did not ask for this," Jon said, clumsy as a boy in truth because he had not had time to be anything else. "I would have taken vows so I could be sure of myself." "You are allowed to want," Ned said. "You are not allowed to be led by it." He leaned on the parapet and looked at the black back of the sea. "I will protect you as I can. It will not be enough. It is not a promise I know how to keep here. You think the queen will. I think the queen has wanted her son to sit that throne since before he had teeth for biting," Ned said, quiet and unsparing. "I think a cornered cat can scratch out the eye of a stronger animal. I think you cannot afford to be anyone but what you are, and that is a man who will not lie because lying rot spreads." Jon tasted salt that was not from the sea. "I know nothing," he said, and hated the rawness of it. "Good," Ned said. "Then you know at least that. Keep knowing it. You will need men who know things. Keep the ones who do not need you to pretend otherwise." In the days that followed, Robert took Jon through the city as if he were reacquainting a younger self with bad habits and good taverns. The king laughed and drank. He also watched, and Jon saw him do it. He watched the faces of his people, how they shifted when they saw stags and lions, how they relaxed when they saw northerners in fur and ice. Ghost moved like an omen by Jon's heel, and people made the sign for warding under their cloaks and did not know whether to fear or be glad. Pycelle sucked his lip and hummed over papers, writing and waiting, always waiting. Littlefinger smiled complicated smiles and arranged loans in ways that made debt look like charity. Varys drifted to Jon twice and left him with a gentle word as harmless as a feather and a feeling of having been weighed without malice. Baratheon stood when Jon entered a room and addressed him as if the future could hear it. Cersei smiled and spoke kindness with an edge. She touched Joffrey's shoulder with a hand that could have been a caress or a clamp. She went hunting with the king one morning with a laugh that was made of knives wrapped in lace. That evening Robert came back with a wound in his side and a story about a boar that had taken offense at his singing. It was not the first time he returned from sport with blood on him and not the boar's. It was not unusual enough to raise a cry. The city laughed, and then it stopped laughing because the king did, and then the city waited. The wound went sick. Robert lay sweating in a dark room that smelled of wine and herbs and the iron under blood. He talked of old days as if they were happening on the wall above him, shifting when his body remembered spears. Ned kept vigil and looked like a man who had learned to sleep without closing his eyes. Cersei visited and smiled and did not look at Jon when she kissed the king's hand. Joffrey came once, and the way he stared at the blood was a lesson in itself. Renly paced like an animal and then left. Pycelle brought poultices and sent ravens and muttered and did not meet Barristan's gaze. Varys stood very still in corners and let his eyes do old, kind things. Robert called for Jon. When Jon stood by the bed, Robert's hand, huge, hot, closed over his wrist as if holding him might keep the world from sliding away. "I named you because I was angry," Robert said, in a voice gone frayed and thin, and then he grinned because he could not help himself. "And because you looked like someone who could stand against a pack of smiling liars without catching their manners. It's a stupid reason and the best one I've had in years." He coughed and something dark stained his lip. "I will not be the last man to regret his appetites. Don't marry a war. Wars are terrible wives." His eyes went vague and then sharp, in a way that said he was outweighed by pain and memory both and refused to stay down. "Ned will hand you a smaller fire than I made. Try not to feed it wolf because wolf is what you have. Keep the north close to you. If the south laughs at your furs, let them. The north keeps its word longer than wine keeps heat." "I never wanted this," Jon said low, "because truth is a habit or it is nothing." "I never wanted to get fat," Robert said, and laughed once and then grimaced. "Such are the wheels we find ourselves strapped to." He turned his head. "Where's that boy's wolf? Bring him. Let him look at me. I want the smell of wild on me if I'm to go. I've smelled too much gilded meat." Ghost came to the bed without a sound. The great head lowered, and for a moment the king and the direwolf exchanged the kind of look that does not need words. Robert closed his eyes as if something like peace had come through the noise. Ned came with a parchment. Robert's hand trembled when he signed, and he put his name to words that were harder than he had ever cared to make. There were witnesses enough to choke a snake. Baratheon, Varys, Pycelle like a vulture dignified by parchment. Littlefinger, Renly, his face white as wax and then gone. Gone on soft boots into the night with quick talk of guards and cousins. The seal went on. The candle flame guttered. The king breathed like a man trying to find a door in a burning house. When the bells told the city the news, they did it in a voice like falling metal. Cersei moved as if she had known what time the hour would come. She sat Joffrey on the iron throne with the speed of pouring a glass and turned to the gold cloaks with a look that made men brave or cowed depending on what they were to start with. The throne room filled like a wound. It stank of old oil and new sweat. Ned arrived with the parchment in his hand and Jon at his shoulder, Ghost at Jon's heel. Baratheon walking like a man submitted to an argument he meant to end with steel if required. Littlefinger stood all benevolence and quick calculation. Varys smiled the smile he wore when a storm approached, soft, resigned, already weighing the damage. "Lord Eddard," Cersei said, cool as deep stone. "We grieve, and you come with paper." "I come with the king's will," Ned said. He did not raise his voice. The words carried. He named Prince Jon as his successor. "Sweet," Cersei murmured. "The north is full of fables. Shall we choose which ones sit thrones now?" Barristan took one step forward. "The king's word is law," he said. "The law," Littlefinger added amiably, "is the thing we all agree to obey until we don't." Cersei's smile flashed, lovely and lethal. "The realm is not a kennel for wolves. It will not be threatened into loving a bastard with a circlet." She turned her head and the gold cloaks moved. The sound of boots across stone has a particular kind of promise. Ned raised the parchment. "By the seal of King Robert Baratheon, first of his name," he said. "The boy Joffrey and his siblings are declared not of his body. By the same seal, Jon, called Snow, is named Prince of Dragonstone and heir until a council can be held to give blessing or an alternative according to the law. Do the City Watch mean to defy the king's seal?" The moment held like a thing trying not to break. Jon could feel the crowd as a living animal. The nameless men in it leaning toward power, toward advantage, toward safety, each with a different idea of what safety meant. He could feel Joffrey vibrating with fury, the energy of a boy whose toys have been taken away in front of everyone. Littlefinger's mouth opened and closed like a gate. "The gold cloaks are guided by coin and command," he breathed, too soft for most to hear. "It depends whose coin, whose command. Their oath is to the king," Barristan answered, and now there was steel in his voice like ice gone to blade. "The king is the one whose seal sits over his own blood." Everything happened at once. The room learned how to split. Some of the gold cloaks turned toward Ned and Jon. Some toward them both with swords lifted, uncertain. Jaime's sword whispered out and then stopped halfway, as if his arm were listening. Sandor Clegane laughed, a harsh bark, and moved as if to put himself in front of the boy on the chair. The hound's loyalty was in his scars as surely as it was in the big ugly dog's head on his helm. Cersei lifted her chin and the queen became a weapon. "Take the paper," she said. Ghost moved first. He did not lunge for a throat. He slid like winter itself between the nearest gold cloak and Jon and stood there, silent, muzzle low. A man thinks differently about acting when teeth are near his wrist. The ripple of it went through the line. A heartbeat changed use in 100 chests. "Hold," Barristan said, and he did not say it like a plea. He held his sword as if it weighed nothing, point grounded, eyes level. He faced the room as if it were a field he knew too well. The first man to move toward Ned turned his shoulder. Barristan's blade kissed it. The second man aimed for the parchment and ended up staring at the floor because Ghost chose to push his weight against the man's shin at the exact moment he put his foot wrong. The third man did not move at all. He looked at his captain, and his captain looked at the queen, and the captain thought of the heads of men mounted above the gates and how paper meant nothing on a spike. "Captain," Cersei said, like winter sunlight, "do you mean to defy the crown?" The captain hesitated, one of those pauses that rip a life in two. His eyes slid to the circlet and back to the boy on the throne and then rested briefly on the old man in white. He lowered his blade. "The Lord Commander is right," he said, and to his credit his voice did not crack. "Our oath is to the king. The king, by the seal and by witnesses, has named his heir." He sounded as if each word had a price. "Until the council meets, we will keep the peace." Cersei's face hardened, beauty turning brittle. "Then keep it," she said, "and call the council. We will see how long wolves last in summer air." The council convened like a drawing of breath. Lords poured in alongside rumors. Stannis did not come, but his letters arrived like knives thrown from a distance, balanced and lethal, saying law and law and law. Renly came and sat with hands folded in sleeves and said charming things that made men believe they had agreed with him long before. Pycelle's memory improved as needed. Littlefinger's sympathy bent the way a reed does when the river rises. Varys smiled sadly and offered Jon soft nets of information that would catch him without feeling like a trap. To establish the realm's comfort, Varys murmured once, "You must give it familiar songs to sing. The North is not a chorus this city knows. Find voices for it." Jon found some, men of the Reach who admired the idea of a king who could look them in the eye and not be made of silk. Men of the Crownlands tired of lions. Merchants who liked the way Ned some sat in columns and came out honest. He sent letters to the North and the Vale, and ravens came back cold and certain. The riverlands stirred with a wary hope that looked like a man learning to keep his head above water. The Ironborn laughed. Theon's father sent a mocking promise of salt and storm, and then went quiet because the weather changed and old rocks had old habits. Dorne wrote a letter full of sand-dry courtesy that said nothing and meant to say they were watching with the bright patience of snakes. Jon went to the sept early one morning to sit on a cold stone and let God or gods witness the fact that he felt unmade. The light through colored glass painted bits of him with greens and reds and blues that had nothing to do with the person sitting there. He remembered the heart tree and its deep red tear tracks, remembered how the North's gods watched without talking and how their silence had felt kinder. "Your Grace," Baratheon said from the shadows. Jon still startled. He would always startle at the title. He could not learn to carry it as easily as a cloak. "Sire," he said, "if you're here to tell me to stop sitting in the dark, I will pretend to be surprised. I'm here to ask what you wish to be called when you meet the Great Council," Baratheon said. He stepped into the light, and colors fell across his white. "If you mean to defer to it, you could refuse a title until it blesses one. If you mean to claim what has already been given by the king, then claim it." "What is wise?" Jon asked. Barristan's mouth softened, rare and so carrying weight. "Wisdom often finds us from the other end of a life," he said. "I can tell you only what I have served. I served a mad king out of oath and honor. I was wrong 1,000 times and right on my best day only a few. I think you should not pretend to be less than you are. Pretending grows monsters." Jon rubbed a hand over his face. "The North will accept me because my father asks them to. The South will accept me because they are tired of lions tearing at each other. That is a bad reason to wear a crown. It is a very good reason to keep one." When the Great Council met, the hall became the center of the world for a time. Stannis came at last, stony and spare, with Davos Seaworth at his back like a bit of tugged tide. He looked at Jon as one looks at a measurement on a map, useful, possibly incorrect, and in need of a line drawn straight through it. "The law," Stannis said within the first hour, and within the second, and within the third, always the law. "The king's will," Ned answered each time, with the same steadiness most men reserve for breathing. "The realm's safety," Renly put in, when it did him a kindness. "Truth, if you can keep it," Varys murmured where safety could not hear him. Cersei made a mask of patience and then excused herself with a bite in the words that was audible a street away. Joffrey seethed like a pot left to boil. Tyrion sat among the Lannister men and watched as if he were measuring a building by how it shook in wind. Jon did not rise to make speeches. He stood when called, spoke when addressed, answered plainly. He said that he had not wanted the honor. He said he would put a border of men where winter would press, because winter does not care for councils. He said he would not put the North's weight on the South's neck but would not remove it either. He said he would send men and materials to the wall because that was a wall, not a metaphor, and the world needs walls as much as it needs laws. He said he would not punish House Lannister for the sins of a queen if they would not require him to ignore those sins for the sake of being left alone. In the end, the council did not bless so much as stop resisting. Stannis stood like a man at the edge of a cliff and chose, in that moment, not to step. He did not bend. He allowed the world to move around him and did not throw himself at it. "I will not kneel," he said, voice iron and old salt. "But I will not draw a sword against a seal signed by Robert. For now." "For now," Renly echoed with a pleasantness that could have been mistaken for warmth, and smiled in a way that made men hope again because hope had always been his most natural weapon. Cersei left the hall with her son and did not slam the door. That was her only courtesy. The next week trumpets sounded on the walls of the Red Keep as if a battle had been won without blood. The High Septon washed his hands a great deal and tried not to look at Ghost. Jon stood with a crown made for a larger head and heard words that had been said to men better and worse than he. The North's gods were not here to see it. The South's gods were very much in attendance. Ned stood at Jon's right hand, solemn as a winter morning. Robb had ridden south at last, called to witness by blood. Catelyn had not come. When the crown touched his hair the second time, it felt no heavier than it had the first, but it felt truer. He could not say why. He looked at the faces. People clapped and cried because that is what people do when a shape is made for them to fit themselves into for an afternoon. He searched for something like a star and found only eyes. So he held himself upright without any light to steer by. After, when wine and meat and words had done their work and failed in the ways they always do, Ned brought him a map. "If you mean to be king," Ned said, "you must look north first." He put his finger at the top of the world, where the white lay like a beast asleep. "There are letters. Jeor Mormont says things that make my bones remember old tales. Benjen has not returned. The shadows in the woods have too many legs." Jon laid his palm on the wall drawn there. The ink was cool under his skin. "I can't leave King's Landing now," he said, and it stung to be right. "You cannot stay forever either," Ned said. "A king's presence is a sword. You must decide where to draw it." "I want to go home," Jon said, and looked at the word Winterfell on the parchment as if that might unfold space itself. "You are at home where your choices are," Ned said, and his voice had the gentleness of a man making peace with a thing he would not have time to change. "I would have spared you this, if wanting were power." Jon sent men north and grain, steel and cold men willing to die in silence. He sent orders that commanded respect for the watch and punishment for those who starved it of thieves in the mistaken belief that thieves were adequate payment for old vows. He sent a blacksmith's guild to the gift with coin enough to build. He wrote to Jeor Mormont and begged him to speak to him as if to a son. He wrote to Maester Aemon and asked for wisdom and got back pages that were half memory and half ice and all kindness. He walked the city. He made himself known to the bakers and the butchers and the men who scraped dung from the streets. He wore a cloak that made men think of nights when wolves sing. And fires are a comfort, and swordsmen watched him go with expressions that said they had forgotten, briefly, what swagger feels like. He spoke to the speechless brothers who tended the poor, to a girl who knew how to climb roofs faster than any man in leather boots. He learned where the rats ran and where the coin changed hands most often and how to nod at the right people at the right corners so that kittens were not stolen and women did not vanish into doors that never opened again. He learned the names of the men who ran the docks and which ships always seemed to come earlier than expected. He learned the taste of a city that would never be his friend but might become his ally if he fed it correctly. At night, sometimes he dreamed of the heart tree. He dreamed of his father standing at its roots and a woman's voice that said a name not his and wanted him anyway in a way that made his chest hurt. He dreamed of ghosts running in snow that had not yet fallen and of blue light that did not warm. He woke and the crown sat on a table by his bed like a quiet rebuke. Tyrion found him one such night on a wall walk, his breath fogging and his nose red as wine. "Your Grace," he said, and the bow he gave was absurd and sincere. "I have been taking the temperature of my relatives. It has given me a chill. Will they try to kill me?" Jon asked, more matter-of-factly than he would have 3 months ago. "I should say no, because it's charming to pretend we live in a better story," Tyrion said. "They will try. You must arrange to be difficult prey. The hound belongs to the boy, but his master is fear. Jaime belongs to himself. My sister belongs to the only thing she has ever loved." He watched Jon's face. "You cannot fight a story with a sword alone. You must give the realm a better story to believe. A boy from the north wearing a crown too big is not a better story." "Then make it into one," Tyrion said and grinned. "Start by not dying. It helps." They laughed, and the sound ran along the dark stones like something freer than sense. Letters kept coming. From Dragonstone. Law, 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 and finally one signed by a hand so hard it nearly carved the parchment, saying, in fewer words, that Stannis would come to court for the sake of the realm's defenses if the king wanted him. Jon wrote back that he did. From Old Town, the citadel was uneasy. Its archmesters smelled storms in the wind and tried to name them as if it would help. A boy with gray eyes wrote a careful hand saying the ravens behaved strangely. From Winterfell, Robb's words were strong and young, like a sword swung a touch too hard. Catelyn's were a measured politeness that did not disguise her grief. Arya smuggled a scrap into Robb's letter with a drawing of Ghost wearing a crown that sat between his ears like a tiny joke Ghost would not have appreciated. Sansa's letter was beautiful and said nothing at all that might be used against her. That was intelligence and injury both. And then, one wet hot day when the city smelled of rotting fish and hope, a ship came in from the narrow sea with a woman who wore red and looked at the king as if he were a puzzle on the point of solving himself. She burned with a heat that frightened and comforted in the same breath. She asked to see Stannis and smiled when told he was on his way. She looked at Ghost and did not flinch. She called Jon a word that meant more than it should. Light, she said in an accent that made the word into a knife that cut darkness. But not yet. He turned from her and wrote another letter to Jeor Mormont. He asked for news. He asked for watchtowers and for the names of men who would die smiling and for the names of men who would die hard and needed to be replaced before they broke. He asked for things pride could not usually ask for openly, and he wrote the asking small and careful and honest. The reply took weeks. It came in a hand that had learned to be clear because everything else had learned to be harsh. We have found dead men who do not keep their peace. We have found old things walking. Your uncle has not come back. Send fire and men and words you can keep. Jon took that letter into the council and put it on the table and did not sit down. This is the story, he said, when men began to speak about coin and rivalries and summer. This is the only story that matters if it is true. We will pretend it is not and die, or we will believe it and perhaps live. Choose which tale you would like your children's bones to tell. He expected laughter. He expected condescension. He got both and he held up a hand. I will go north, he said into the noise. I will stand on that wall and look. If you will not follow a king you do not trust yet, follow a man with eyes. If I am fooled by tales, send me home in shame and choose another. If I am not, we will move grain and men and metal as if there were a war coming. No one at this table is smart enough to win alone. Ned's mouth set and then curved, slowly, as if he were remembering a boy learning to hold a sword. Baratheon nodded once, the kind of nod he gave before lifting steel. Tyrion hid a smile in his cup. Renly made a show of admiration because admiration cost him nothing and bought him much. Stannis did not move and then inclined his head by a fraction, which in his language was all the vowels of approval. Cersei's laugh was winter and glass. Go, she said. Freeze. The city will learn to like south wind again. When Jon rode from King's Landing with a column of men in black and silver, the city watched him with the look of a gambler who has put a coin he cannot spare on a number no one else has chosen. Ghost flowed at his side like a rumor made flesh. Ned rode at his right for the first miles, and their silence felt like a hearth. They spoke of Winterfell and of the Godswood and of Robb's impatience and Arya's untamable feet and Sansa's songs that had learned caution. Your mother, Ned said, and stopped. And Jon kept looking at the road because to look anywhere else would be an invitation he was not sure he could accept. Your mother was dear to me, Ned said at last, careful. The rest matters less than men like to say. Jon let the words lie between them like a pelt over cold stone. He stroked Ghost's neck and told himself he would be patient enough to live into an answer rather than drag one into daylight half-formed and bleeding. They parted before the trident. Ned bound back to a city that would never love him and Jon to a wall that would never lie. They clasped hands in a way that was a seal and not a farewell. Jon rode with men who had come to him by different paths. Some because they believed, some because they were paid, some because they wanted a story to tell that would include the word king in its beginning. The road north opened like a scar. The air grew clean. The pines made their long music. Tyrion did not come this time, and Jon missed another set of eyes looking at the world as if it were a puzzle box in need of a thief. When the wall rose into the sky again, it did not feel like a return. It felt like a summoning. The blue deep in the ice seemed darker. The shadows along the tree line swallowed sound. Jeor Mormont met him on the steps with a grip that made bones speak. Your Grace, he said without looking away, as if he were addressing the title as a beast he meant to test with a stick. You came. I said I would, Jon answered, and the words warmed him beyond the cloak he wore. They walked the top of that impossible wall together, old man and young, king and commander, and the wind tried to tear breath out of their lungs for the crime of thinking themselves important. The world north of the wall lay like a mouth. Jon looked into it and felt the hair at the back of his neck stand. Not in fear exactly, but in recognition, as if something old had raised its head and seen him and was pleased. He slept in a cold cell with the crown on a chair like a moon run aground, and he dreamed of a woman who wept under a tree and a man with purple eyes smiling while the world burned. And he dreamed of a stag and a wolf making a sign with their bodies at the edge of a white wood. He woke with his hands clenched and Ghost's great head pressed to his chest. In the morning he called for quills and ink and wrote letters that did not care whether the world believed in old nightmares. He wrote to Stannis and to Renly and to men he had never met and to places he had only sworn to protect. He wrote in a hand steady as a drawn bow, "We are not alone on this side of the world. Come see or send men who will not flinch. Send smiths, send engineers, send oil, send provisions. Send horses and oxen and patience and men accustomed to long cold. Send whatever you can spare that you will not swallow in regret when summer lies to you." He did not reach for poetry. He did not need it. Snow fell, lazy, not yet the terrible thing it would be. The first patrol came in at dusk with a body that moved on its own until it did not, when fire kissed it. The smell was wrong. The sound it made had nothing to do with human throats. The men watched their king watch, and something like trust gathered at the edges of the yard like wolves coming back to a hearth after a long night. When Stannis came, he came with grim faces and men who marched as if winter had already seated itself at their tables. A red woman rode near him, and her hair was a warning. She looked at the wall the way a priest looks at a scripture written by a hand he has been praying to for years without answer. Davos came also, his smile a melancholy sun. He took Jon's hand like a man grateful to be allowed into a room that might do good and ruin both, and said the shorter truth for longer men, and Jon liked him for it. They stood together and watched the woods breathe. They made plans that cared little for pride and much for distance and lines and the time men take to freeze. They put aside old insults by naming them and then setting them on a shelf. They spoke of the South as if it were a lover too needy to be left alone for long. They spoke of the North as if it were a patient that would die if you stopped looking at it for 1 hour. At night, in the cold that made steel sing and speak, Jon sat under a sky so crowded with stars it felt like mercy. He thought of Robert laughing like thunder. He thought of Cersei's smile and the way it did not reach her eyes. He thought of Ned's hand on his shoulder and the weight of a circlet and the weight of a wall and how both could break the neck of a man not careful to stand straight. He thought of a boy called Snow who had once decided vows would be a place to put his longing so it would not crush him. Ghost lifted his head and breathed in a direction Jon could not see. The direwolf's ears pricked. The night had a taste to it, metallic, sweet, old. Jon stood, and the crown on the chair looked a small thing behind him. "Come," he told Ghost, as if the next step were nothing more than a walk in the woods he had known all his life. "We have work." He went where the cold was thickest and found men he could turn into a wall made of flesh and intention. He wrote and rode and watched and learned the sound ice makes when it decides a river will drown a man. He sat with the Lord Commander and with a king who had learned too late the cost of pride, and a smuggler who knew how to tell a hard truth gently, and a priestess who spoke of fire as if it were a god who paid attention. He went to the weirwood and put his hand to the old face and did not ask it for anything except witness. He slept little. He did not die. He kept breathing, which is a politics older than crowns. In the end, and endings are only stops for breath, the realm would call the winter that followed a dozen different names. The singers would find their story. Some would say a bastard wore a crown and remembered where the true cold lay. Some would say a wolf sat a southern chair until it learned how to stand up and leave it in better hands for a less comfortable fight. Some would say the law was bent in a way that did not break it. Some would say it shattered and grew back in a new shape. Some would never forgive the day a lion's golden cheeks lost their blush. Jon did not yet know those songs. He knew only the weight of the air before snow and the way Ghost's ears turned like hands toward an old sound in the dark. He stepped onto the ice-worn stairs at dawn with wind like knives and breath like smoke, and a sense, strong and simple, that he belonged to this more than to any chair hammered from swords. He was the king a dying man had named in anger and hope and grief. He was the son of a silence that had taught him patience. He was the boy who had meant to say vows that would have cut him off from everything that had made him. He was a cold hand on a cold stone, a shallow crown, a long road, and a wolf. And while the South argued with itself in warm rooms and the bells remembered the sound of a healthier laughter, Jon Snow stood where the world narrowed to a blade and lifted his head to the wind as if listening for instructions. When the first far horn blew, thin and strange, he felt something old inside him answer, as if a door in his blood swung, slowly, on a hinge no map had marked. He went to meet it,